G'day guys, it is the coach and he is back. It has been a while since I've done a talking video. We've had lots going on. We've had Techless, we've got Bellacore, there's all this stuff that's happening in the game, but one thing that is consistent in life, it's that Flesh Eater Courts are here, and I'm excited to talk about Flesh Eater Courts with JP. JP, a mangled crypt ghoul. He might think he's a beautiful king or an emperor or whatever it might is, but I'm here from reality telling he looks like hot garbage. But no, hello, welcome.
And that was it, and that's it. We'll see you next week. No, thanks a lot. Glad to be here.
Oh, I love Flesh Eater Courts. I'll chat to you in a minute about why you started and talking about it. But when I come back from Warhammer World in 2017 or 2018, because I went to play at Blood of Glory with my free people back in the day, and then I'm like, what's my next army I'm going to pick? And I picked up Flesh Eater Courts. I bought 4 start collecting boxes because it's so cheap in England. It's so cheap. And I remember going to Greece with my wife with a suitcase full of start collecting boxes for Flesh Eater Courts. So they have a special place in my heart. I was OG Grizzlegore before Grizzlegore had Battleline Terrorgeists. But talk to me about why you love Flesh Eater Courts. Let's set the scene for anyone who maybe is thinking about their next army, or they're just getting into Flesh Eater Courts, because there's always a meme, they're the Bretonia of like there's this delusional Knights of the Realm, but actually they're horrible ghouls.
I think sort of it's twofold about how like what I love about Flesh Eater Courts, and what I think I know I mentioned this to you before, about one, in terms of the army play style. I just love the it's fast, it's punchy. We're getting into it later. We got this feeding frenzy. We got the savage. We got the savage lore matched with the savage damage that comes out in the rules. And two, this is what we were talking about before, is I've always, since I've started, I've just loved the Flesh Eater Courts community. I think you've got, as you've touched upon, those cool lore rules of the delusional, versus the reality. And I feel like the community for Flesh Eater Courts has always matched that, in terms of it never has mattered the power level of Flesh Eater Courts in the game, which has gone up and down. Everyone's just always like, I love it, and this is what I'm slapping people with right now. So I think for me, that's why I love it so much.
It's wild because when you look at the Flesh Eater Courts roster, it's not that deep. But I've met so many crazy Flesh Eater Courts that are just I just want to put on the table nothing but ghouls. 100 to 200 ghouls. But then I meet people who are like, I was going to have all the flayers. And they're just so passionate about Flesh Eater Courts. And I was Terrorgeists. I'm I just want to run all the Terrorgeists. I want to have a Ghoul King on his zombie dragon, because I think that was better at the time. And he's just going to have Terrorgeists. And people are just happy doing it. I think you're right. The community is a pretty cool community. I haven't met a jerk Flesh Eater Courts player. Well, Liam, my former co-host, was one of those Flesh Eater Court jerks, but he was a jerk before he got into Flesh Eater Courts.
Nice, okay, he had priors.
Yeah, he was he's always been a jerk. He's like that one-drop Sylvaneth player from back in the day. But I love Liam. He's my boy. But Flesh Eater Courts to me, when I look at the book, they're just so much fun. They you can do some crazy things. I've met people in the community who have literally cut their models in half, and they've done half Stormcast, half Flesh Eater Courts to kind of replicate the delusion. I've seen people like myself, and I'm not the only person, who's actually tapped into the old Warhammer Fantasy Battles, Knights, and some of the old type of style, and given them lances, given them shields, given them legitimate chivalry type, and they work really well. At least for me, I look at mine, I've got helmets and plumes, and I've got a musician and a standard bearer ghoul, and
I think. Sorry, I was just going to say, I just love it. A similar thing, my army, I was I've got it half gold. Bits of the models are just basically highlighted gold, and then they've got a little laser bleed effect into the actual sort of grisly undead feeling. And, it works however well it works. But it was just, it's a really fun concept to think about as a hobbyist.
Before I bring up the rules, I will say I went as crazy far as I went and bought the White King, the Undead White King, and all I wanted was the crown. So I got my Archregent, and I literally put a crown on him. I haven't used the other parts of the White King. It's just I paid $30 to get a crown. I'm I've lost it.
It's value. It's value.
I'm under the delusion. But I think, long story short, guys, if you're not seeing this, they are a cool army. They're a fun army. They don't have all of the units in the world. They're no Stormcast. They're no Cities of Sigmar. But their roster is deep enough to be able to rotate and find different play styles, which I think I love. And the rules are just great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I know we've got sort of 2 lists to look at, but there are so many different lists, even though you're looking at, 5 or 6 war scrolls that are making up the meat of those. It's just like where you focus, which of these grand courts you're looking at. There's just, as you say, a lot of option to go deep into what is it that you want to do, and you can build that list.
If you're new to the series, basically what we will do, folks, is we'll go some very high-level rules. We'll talk a little bit about how JP looks at the allegiance, the terrain piece, and just get some thinking behind how he's looking at the position of Flesh Eater Courts right now with the meta. And then we'll go through 2 lists. They aren't the only 2 lists on the internet. It's not to say that this is the 5-0 tournament list, but it's putting the theory into practice and showing you how he's thinking about the rules and then applying it in a list. And you tailor and tweak it. If you like something else and you want to run all the ghouls, or if you love your horrors over the flayers, or you want to run Smash Bat with all the Vargulfs, like, you do you. That's really the theme here. Are you ready to jump in?
I'm ready.
All right, so we got some allegiance rules. You got 4 key allegiance rules coming out of Flesh Eater Courts. I'm going to go through a very high level, but what I'd love to understand from you, JP, is, are they all important? When you're thinking about building a list, obviously some of them, they're all going to have their use at some place. But when you're list building, when you're thinking about this tactically, are you building around all 4 of them? Are there things that you maybe just they're there because they're nice? And what I mean by that is you've got your Deathless Courtiers. So basically, if you're within 12 inches of a Flesh Eater Courts hero, you're going to be able to negate a wound or a mortal wound or a 6. You've got your Grand Court, so basically there is a sub-allegiance. So once you choose Flesh Eater Courts, you can choose to be Morgant, Hallowmorn, Blisterskin, or Grizzlegore, and that gives you a bunch of extra rules that goes on top. You've also got your Courts of Delusion, and then you've also got your command ability, which is Feeding Frenzy. So when you look at these rules, are they all important to your list and your strategies?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we can start with Deathless Courtiers. That is this sort of, you see it in Death a lot. You get this ward save, this extra save against wounds and mortal wounds if you're near heroes. It's actually a really good rule. I think it can be overlooked a little bit, but if you think a Terrorgeist has 14 wounds, getting an extra 2 wounds is actually, that's like a command trait in some armies. It's decent. So I think you're sort of lucky in Flesh Eater Courts in that you're probably going to be taking heroes anyways. So you don't necessarily need to worry about it, but it is a good rule. And if you find yourself maybe with you're building a list with only 1 hero, you might want to make sure that you're doing that. That is definitely what you want to be doing, because it's small, but over 100 to 200 wound army, that's a lot of extra wounds.
It really. I always thought think about power pairs at least. Like if there's something that's important to me, it might not be like the throwaway unit of 10 ghouls, but if I've got a Terrorgeist, if I've got a unit of horrors or flayers, I'm always thinking about the hero that's going to support them. And to ensure that they can keep up. Like a perfect example is a Flayer moves really fast. And if you're trying to chase it around with, I don't know, just an Archregent on foot. Yeah, like if they're just on foot, like just running, it makes life a lot harder, or you're not getting the most value out of your Flayer. So that's how I'm always thinking about it.
Exactly. And I think I was going to say that as well. That's going to tie in, to jump ahead with this Feeding Frenzy. Sort of starting a little bit at the end here, but Feeding Frenzy is really a great ability, right? This is, when I'm thinking about Flesh Eater Courts, this is what I'm thinking of, which is basically that it's a command ability that lets you fight twice. That's sort of the simplest way to think about it. And you sort of what you're saying, you need a hero to use that ability. He can use it on himself. He can use it on your big block of flayers if that's your threat. And as you say, if you've got a block of 9 flayers, you're going to want to make sure that your list has a fast hero to keep up with them, so that your 9 flayers is outputting the damage of 18 flayers, and that it's immediately that attack. So I know there are things like Van Hell's Dance Macabre and some other stuff that let you fight twice, but your opponent fights in between. And so this is a lot stronger because you're not going to lose any of your flayers in between those two pylons. So you really are going to be thinking about keeping, your heroes, as you say, heroes that can keep up with your power units, or heroes that are your power units, like, in a lot of the Gristle Court lists. And then we oh, yep, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, you not every unit. Correct me if I'm wrong, but not every unit has to be considered for feeding frenzy. Not every unit has to be babysit by a hero, because that's all of a sudden you start getting really expensive. Like, let's say, for example, you got 10 ghouls that normally sit on an objective. I don't need to put a hero with it to give it a 6-up, and I don't need to be thinking about 10 ghouls for feeding frenzy. But I guess, yeah, well, I'm not trying to I'm not trying to disrespect your people here. But if I've spent a lot of points into a terrorgeist, Flayer unit, a horror unit, I really want to think about,
I think, again, what is a cool thing about Flesh Eater Courts, because you're obviously right. Like, if you're choosing between, you don't want to spend 200 points for a hero for every 100 points you spend on a unit, because you'll run out of points. But I think a nice thing about Flesh Eater Courts is, and we'll see this later, you do get those support heroes who are the Archregent on foot, maybe the Ghoul King, maybe a Cryptcast Courtier, and when they are, because they're slow, they're probably going to be around your unit of 10 ghouls. And so sometimes in the late game, it's going to be turn 5, and I think it's important to not forget that you can Feeding Frenzy your ghouls. Again, most of the time you want to Feeding Frenzy 9 flayers, a Terrorgeist, something with a million buffs on it. But, I've had the games where you're like, I really need to kill this, 5 wound hero, and all I've got is 6 ghouls. And you're like, well, actually, I'm going to put all the buffs on these 6 ghouls. I'm going to make him pile in and attack twice, and that's, that gets you the damage that you need to kill it. And so, again, I totally agree. Like, you've got to make sure that you can buff your big pieces, but it's just important to remember that you can double, that Ghoul King can double pile in himself. If you really need to do one more damage, don't forget that you can, do these things, because it's easy to forget that you sort of just think, oh, they're just ghouls.
Well, especially like with a lot of teleporting and a lot of like summoning, something comes in your backfield and they're challenging your objective. Normally it's a unit of 5 or 10 things getting in. And yeah, you're right. You just need that 1 or 2 more damage to maybe cause battle shock, or, keep them away from the objective. So that's a really good point. Yeah. So don't write them off. But I think just start thinking about synergies and the importance of how you can make the most of your courtier, your deathless courtiers, as well as Feeding Frenzy. Talk to me about the Courts of Delusion, or are you going to talk about Grand Courts next?
I mean, you can sort of link them together, right? Like, so basically these Grand Courts and these Courts of Delusion are the sort of sub-allegiances. So you're going to take Flesh Eater Courts, and then probably the first decision you're going to be making is, what court am I going to be playing them in? And so basically in the book, you have these 4 Grand Courts set up for you, which are important in the lore, and they come with their own rules and like their own command trait. You see in a lot of books, their own command trait, their own artifact that you have to take, and some really great, some great buff. And in for the Grand Courts, in Flesh Eater Courts, they correspond to the units basically. So your ghouls go in Morgaunt, right? Your horrors, your crypt horrors go in Hollowmourne, your crypt flayers go in Blisterskin, and your big grizzlies, your dragons, your terrorgeists are in Gristlegore. It's not to say you don't have some of those units in the other factions. You do, and you're likely to have like, an abhorrent Ghoul King on a terrorgeist or on a zombie dragon in probably any of those. You can easily do that, but that's sort of what they're built around. And the Courts of Delusion, I haven't seen them played as much. There is one of them that's really good, which is Feast Day, which means basically once per turn, so that's twice per battle round, you can use this Feeding Frenzy command ability without spending a command point, and that is really good. And one of the things I like about Flesh Eater Courts is you are making these sort of tough strategic decisions that aren't just, well, this is better than this. You're looking at Gristlegore and you're thinking, okay, I get, exploding 6s. I get to fight at the start of the combat phase if I've charged. But, do I have the command points to support myself that I could get a little less damage, but a little more command points in this Feast Day Court of Delusion? So it's a cool thing to think about and look through all those courts, but that's probably going to be your first decision. Oh,
No, please continue.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I was just going to say, so you're probably like, if I was new to Flesh Eater Courts, I'd be thinking the way I'd be approaching it is I'd be like, which models, whenever either because of the rules or the models or whatever, do I want to build my list around? And if it's the mounted kings, or the unmounted dragons, it's going to be Gristlegore. If it's the horrors, it's going to be Hollowmorn. If it's the flayers, it's going to be Bliskin. If it's ghouls, it's going to be Morgaunt. And then you can sort of ignore the other ones while you make your list. You don't really most likely you probably don't have to check if your 200 ghouls list would be better in Blisterskin. You're probably fine for focusing on that, investigating the different, the tweaks you want to do in your list there. And then if you're like, oh, I don't really like this list, I want to change it completely, you can start looking at these other Grand Courts. But yeah, if I was new, I'd be picking a Grand Court and just imagining that's my whole allegiance when I was starting out.
Yeah, so just the relationship between the Grand Courts and the Courts of Delusion. It's also an illusion. But basically, with the Grand Courts, you don't have to take it. So some other battle tomes force you to take the sub-allegiance. In Flesh Eater Courts, you don't have to. So if you look at Morgaunt, if you look at Blisterskin and Gristlegore, and you're like, I don't really like it, it's not really for me, that's where you get a little bit more customization through the Courts of Delusion. And there's some really good ones. I love the Crusading Army that gives you the +1 to run and charge rolls. I love Feast Day. It allows you to, as you said, use Feeding Frenzy without spending a command point. There's some other really cool ones, and there's some really interesting artifacts. However, and I think to the point of, I think was it Kendron in the chat. You do give up some things. So, are you better off taking Blisterskin? Are you better off building in your? I guess it depends on how you're building and what you're really being drawn to. So overall, some really good things. And maybe a question that I'll pull up from Dice Sagas before we continue is, do you think that Flesh Eater Courts is competitive across the board? I'm not saying 5-0, you're winning 5 games in the tournament and, you're drinking the tears of Croak and Teclis. but do you think that right now there's only one way to go, like, Terrorgeists are the one way to go? Or do you think there's opportunity across all of the different, flayers, ghouls, horrors?
I absolutely think that Flesh Eater Courts as a total faction is a competitive army. I think you can go to an event, as you say, you're probably maybe you win your first 4 games, you go up into game 5 against Croak and something key unit gets exploded and you're sad about it. I'm not saying pick up this army if all you care about is winning, but I would have no problem as a competitive player picking up Flesh Eater Courts and bringing, I think, any of the 4 Grand Courts to an event and being like, I'm pretty confident that I'm going to be able to beat a lot of people on a lot of battle plans, and I haven't, the one I haven't sort of explored is Hollowmorn. I played the other ones and they're all good and they all have tricks. And one of the things I say this a lot on a lot of different topics, but if you walk up to an event with a Morgaunt list, right, and you play against a Seraphon player, you've probably thought a lot about what's going to happen when you meet Seraphon. When you're building your list, you're like, well, what's it like playing against Seraphon? How do I deal with Croak? That Croak player has probably literally never considered what they're going to do against 200 ghouls. They're like, I don't know what that does. Are ghouls good? Is this, they wipe out one of your big units of ghouls, and with the Morgaunt ability, you spend a CP on a 4+, you're bringing them back onto the table, and your opponent's like, oh man, I sort of didn't really, I knew you could do that, but I didn't really think of it. And so I think gamers, it can, in all games, and Age of Sigmar included, can sometimes get a little bit in the mindset of if you're not first, you're last. Like, are Flesh Eater Courts one of the 3 best armies in Age of Sigmar? No. Does that mean they're unplayable? Does that mean they're not competitive? Does that mean you can't get 4 wins? And it's like, no. Does it mean you can't get 5 wins? No. You can still, if you can get 4 wins, you can turn up to that game 5 and you can be like, oh, this is a good matchup on a good battle plan for me. Or this is the game where I rolled all 6s. This is the game where my Terrorgeist did 36 mortal wounds, because those games exist. And so I just think, I think it's a really cool faction. I think you can take any of those 4 Grand Courts, or, again, you can take a Feast Day list for sure, and I'm sure the other ones that I know less about. And you can make a competitive list and go to a tournament and not feel like, you're not taking a fluffy list that you just took because you like the models. You're taking a competitive list that also is one of the coolest factions.
The average Flesh Eater Courts, in my opinion, is probably going to win 2 to 3 games at a 5-game tournament. Just an average Flesh Eater Courts. In the hands of a skilled pilot in the right conditions, it definitely has opportunity to win 4, to win 5. But winning 3 out of 5 is probably where we want most armies to sit. So if you're sitting in what's called the fat middle, that's a good thing, because it means that Games Workshop's not focusing on you, and they see Grizzlegor's gotten too powerful. So then there's FAQs and changes to the rules and points adjustments. So, but I think you're right. Like, I think when I look at this, building around flayers, horrors, ghouls, and terrorgeists, absolutely there are ways to do it, and we're going to talk about how to do it. But before we get into some of your lists, I want to get some of your thoughts around, I guess, 2 key things. First is your terrain piece. You get yourself a free terrain piece. And for most people, when I talk to them, they're like, yeah, I just want to get the free CP and just, do a free summon, and then I don't care about it. How do you think about your terrain piece? Do you have an idea or a strategy on when you put it on the table? Is it bringing more than just summoning? Like, how do you look at this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily wrong, right? If someone was like, "Oh, I think of it as just a free CP, right, for this summoning," I'm like, "Yeah, that's not a terrible idea, but it does do more." It really, like, especially right in the current meta, there's a lot of shooting, right? And this, again, if you are thinking like, okay, I've got my Arch Regent, and mainly what he's going to be doing is buffing up my faster units in the first turn, then they're going to be too far away, and he's going to be sitting around with my ghouls against this shooting army, right? You're like, that's a great time for him after he's run on to the throne to be hiding behind this for line of sight, to be standing on top of it for +1 save, right? And he's a tanky guy, your Arch Regent. He'll have a 3-up save when he's standing on this with cover, and he's healing 3 wounds a turn. So, and he can be -1 to hit if you have your ghouls also around the throne. And so it is a useful little piece for keeping those support heroes alive, and I think lots and lots of games I've hidden, a small hero in here, or even you can try and if the terrain on the table is set up right, you can get a sort of angle where you can line up your ghouls behind it, and you're like, I need to leave 10 ghouls sitting on my home objective, and they're just going to be in their deck chairs. Their deck chairs might as well be behind this Tower of Bone, and even despite the fact I probably never remember it, Inspiring and Sinister. This ties into what we were saying before. It's hard to remember because it's not going to come up a lot, but it's exactly those battles where you're like, I've got 10 ghouls on this objective, my opponent has put 5 life takers down, and we fought, and I lost 4 ghouls and he lost 3 life takers, and you're like, ooh, a battle shock test here could decide who controls the objective or something. And you're like, there, +1, again, everything, all the important stuff is dead. Your heroes have run away. You don't know what's going on. That -1 bravery, that can really have a big effect. I had a game recently, it was with Nighthaunt rather than Flesh Eater Courts, but where I had the -1 bravery meant that 1 eel battle shocked off and won me the game. And
well, I've had a Man Crusher, a 12 wound Man Crusher run from Battle Shop because they've only got Bravery 7, right?
Yeah.
The Bravery 7, and Gargets don't have a lot of CP. They've got no battalions. It's really no way generating a lot of CP. And I had a Man Crusher run. I rolled a 6. There was a -1. There was a -1, and that hurt. So that can be the difference. You're right. Yep. That can be the difference between retaining and scoring objective, removing a unit. And sometimes it could be a 3 wounds, 2 wounds. So they can be quite tanky as
Iron
well.
Doors, right? Stuff like Stormcast, again, where you're just like, oh yeah, 5 Liberators were here. That difference between killing 1, your ghouls do not go through Liberators easily. So killing 1 from Battle Shock is good. Again, I'm not trying to say like, oh, your Charnel Throne is just a crazy bravery debuff piece, but it's just like, don't just try and be like, the important thing is getting my summoning out of it, and after that, how can I still use it? A piece of terrain that gives you some defensive abilities is good. It's just good. It's free real estate. It's literally free real estate. So
yeah, whether it's like blocking coherency and trying to make units go around a little bit further, it's definitely no OBR piece of terrain. It's not this massive footprint. But in saying that, I think you're right. I think some people are quick to just dispose of it just as you summon and then move along. I think it's good that I wanted to highlight a few other ways.
Yeah.
Just, even line of sight, a lot of there's a lot of shooting coming back at the moment. It's not going to help you against Lumineth, sorry guys, with the archers, but if you really want to have it does give you cover. Well, I mean, they ignore line of sight, like they're just fishing for those mortal wounds.
Yeah, but they're going to get 2 normal hits, and you're going to save both on exactly 3s, and you're going to be really happy. But you're on your.
You're going to roll your 6-up additional save.
Exactly.
Like, and the other cool thing as well is that the terrain piece is just a lovely looking piece of terrain.
Yeah.
Before we get into your list, I did want to get your quick thoughts on something that came out recently, which is, Broken Realms Techless. And Broken Realms Techless did give us a battalion for Flesh Eater Courts. And I was looking at it, and like when I was doing my review, I'm like, it's kind of all right. Like when I looked at it, it's like, right, well, first off, my Archregent is named, so I can't do a lot with it. I looked at it and go, right, I've got to have a unit of horrors, got to have a unit of ghouls. Okay. I mean, I'm more of a Flayer man than a horror guy, but okay, there's potential in there. But then I'm like, right, well, I get to not take bravery tests for my within an Archregent bubble, and I'm like, well, ghouls are already 10 bravery. Like, what's so good about that? But then I also get my my Ravaging Crusader command ability without spending a CP.
Mm-hmm.
So when I looked at this, and I'm like, I don't see the big uptake on this, other than obviously things that I was already taking, reducing my drops.
Yeah.
But locking my Archregent to be a unique character. Like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, right, when you make him a unique character, all I'm thinking really is you're losing probably the dermal robe, right? The buff to casting. And if your list is taking more than one Archregent, hard now with the points, or just more than one wizard or something like that, you can probably find somewhere else to put your artifact, or your 2 artifacts. I'm gonna say, I'm gonna say that it's actually a good battalion if you're gonna play a list that a Hollowmorn list that is gonna have these things in it. So if I was playing a Hollowmorn list, there's a good chance I do actually have a unit of ghouls in it. And then this sort of thing makes me think, okay, well, I could actually probably play a unit of 40 ghouls and keep them with my Archregent. That makes sense to me. If I had 40 ghouls in Hollowmorn, my Archregent can keep up with them, like we were talking about before. And the Battle Shock thing isn't terrible. And, the only thing I don't like about this sort of command trait is it's only your general who can use the Ravenous Crusader's command ability. It's not anyone, which is a bit annoying. But again, if you have a general, I don't believe your Archregent has to be your general, even though he's named. So you have your Crypt Haunter Courtier who keeps up with your horrors. He can use this, which I think is +1 to run in charge, and you can run in charge, or +1 to hit in charge. It's a nice little buff for your horrors, basically, your knights. That's fine. That's a free CP once per battle. It's not as good as like Feast Day, which is once per turn, but it's fine. And it's 100 points, and it doesn't really have any tax units. That's what so when I look at the battalion, I'm like, it doesn't have any tax, and it's reasonably cheap. So if I was going to run it, if I was already thinking about a list where I was like, I want to take some ghouls in my horrors list, then this battalion isn't terrible. I think what you're saying is I don't really know the list that I'm building that makes me, I don't see this battalion and think, whoa, this has opened me up to this new idea for a list that's going to be crazy powerful. But I can see myself being like, oh, I have a list already. I'd like to get an extra artifact. I'd like to drop down in drops.
Bingo. That's where I see this. I see this because there's a lot of battalions where you start with the battalion first and then you build within it.
Yep.
But then there's other ones like this where I'm looking at my my Hollowmorn and I'm like, right, well, I've already got the horror, I've already got the ghouls, I've already got the Archregent. And so basically what I'm saying is I wouldn't build around this particular battalion. But if I was already building Hollowmorn, if I was already going to take these units, it might be worth the consideration. And Ravaging Crusaders as well gives you the +1 to run and charge until your next hero phase. And you can run and charge later in the same turn. So being able to really slingshot a large unit of horrors, and you could stack that with Chronomatic Cogs. You could find other ways to kind of increase that. That could be a turn 1 charge. Might. You know what I mean? Like,
you can do exactly. And I sort of think also with Flesh Eater Courts, I'm looking at this 100-point price tag, and I'm like, So that means I'm probably looking at a list where I'm saying, do I want 10 more ghouls, one endless spell, or this battalion? You know, because there aren't a lot of things in Flesh Eater Courts that cost 100 points or less. You know, your extra command point, which this sort of is anyways. You know,
and you get the CP,
yeah.
so
and you sort of get 2 CP, right? Because you're getting this once per battle use of a command ability. So it sort of strikes me as if I had a list that had, you know, it's probably got an Archregent. If I had a list with horrors and ghouls and I wanted to play Hollowmorn, I'd be like, oh, I have 100 points spare. I might as well just slot in this sort of free 2 CP, free 1 artifact thing. Again, I don't see myself building a list based on it, but I can see, you know, that you might be like, oh yeah, okay, I'll do that.
Agreed. I 100%. And that was kind of my general take. So, but what is not a general take is list number 1. So I'm just putting a timestamp on. So what we're going to look at here is your first list. And I think we're going to talk about Blister Skin. And I'd love to, again, find out, one, are you building around all 4 of these? You're going to get yourself an ability, you get yourself a command ability, you get yourself a command trait, you get yourself an artifact. Are all 4 of these important? Why Blister Skin? And we'll obviously then connect it to some of the lists and kind of break it down and how you're kind of tapping into it. But, you know, for the people who are joining on the podcast who may not have the battle tome in front of them, some of the key things you need to know is that your ability, you're going to get +2 to your movement characteristic for Blister Skin units. Your artifact is going to subtract 1 to the hit rolls for attacks made by missile weapons targeting friendly Blister Skin within 6. It's not too bad. You've also then got yourself a command trait, which if the general's on the battlefield, you're going to get yourself a command point on a 4+. And then finally, Lords of the Burning Sky, which gives you a whole bunch of things. I'm not going to read that out.
You can teleport flying units, basically.
Cool. Yeah, I was just going to make a quick summary, but yeah, you teleport something, and your traditional stay outside of 9 inches, and you can't move after that. So, talk to me. Are all 4 of these good? Why Blister Skin compared to the rest?
Yeah. So, I mean, right. So the first one, this is sort of what I think when I think of like, am I taking Blister Skin? I'm often thinking of, you know, it's +2 to move to your whole army, and that's really good. It's like it turns your flayers who go a really long way already into like, you know, you're sort of, you can almost, because they go so far, it's almost like +2 to their charge instead of +2 to their move. But it just, and it makes your slow units like your heroes and your ghouls, just turns them from sort of slowish units to sort of fastish units. Your ghouls moving 6 are now moving 8, which is actually pretty fast for the type of infantry that they are. So that's really good.
That is awesome. As someone who plays a lot of armies, movement 8 battle line.
That's fast. That's fast.
A horde is awesome. But then you think about something like the flayers. The flayers move 12, so that makes them 14. Yeah. The horrors are moving 7, so that's 9. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, it really does. I think it's, you know, it can look small on paper, just +2, but it really is like a considerable amount of movement. If you often think that you're like positioning yourself so that you're ending up on a 7-inch charge, you know, you're now positioning yourself so most of the time you're on a 5-inch charge, and that, you know, or you're sort of, you know, your deployments get, you know, that much closer, so you got that much more turn 1 threat. 2 inches actually can be quite a lot. I think we'll come to Lords of the Burning Skies, the teleport last. The command trait is good. You know, just on a 4+, you're getting an extra command point. That's really good. It's, you know, you need, as we've talked about, those command abilities. Feeding Frenzy is tying your whole army together. So getting free command points, you know, it's just good. It's just good. You know, it's a 4+. It's not the most reliable version of this rule, but it's really good, especially in a game where, you know, we've moved on from original Flesh Eater Courts where you can't stack command points in your list anymore. Ether Quartz Broached, which used to give you some free command points, doesn't exist. These are really valuable. You know, if you think about, you've got a list with, you know, whatever big combat unit it is, this 4+ is doubling the damage of one of your units. That's sometimes, you know, that's sometimes a 400 points worth of damage in that command point. We got Eye of Hish, which is -1 to be shot around one hero with the artifact. That's good. Again, we've talked about there's a lot of shooting. You don't want your heroes to die, you know, especially before they summon, especially before they get their first set of buffs up for your Alpha Strike, you know, stuff like that. So it, you know, if you've got an Archregent who, again, he's on the throne, so he's a 3-up save. He's -1 to hit from this this artifact. He's -1 to hit from Lookout Sir. he's hard to see because he's, you know, in the nooks and crannies of this bone throne, and that's just, I think it's just, it, you know, again, it's a lot of times the tax artifact you have to take is something that you're like, this doesn't really do anything. Like, for example, the Gristlegore one is, you know, once per game, you can eat like a small unit by rolling over its wound. That's, you know, you're like, okay, it's decent, you know, it lets you eat standard bearers, but it's not great. This I just think is pretty good for attack, considering you have to take it. And then Lord of the Burning Skies, the teleport is solid. You know, I think when you move so fast, it's sort of a weird, it's at odds sometimes with some of the other stuff. And it only works on units that can fly, which are your faster units. But there is a nice combo where the spell Spectral Host for Flesh Eater Courts, which I've taken in my list and is probably one of the best spells, which allows.
We haven't got to that yet. They don't know that.
Yeah, well, I'm just gonna say it's all right. But there's a combo with this later. No spoilers. Yeah, okay. But yeah, the teleport again. This can be good late game, right? Where you're like, I've been fighting over in one corner of the battlefield to win this objective, and now it is nice to just be able to pick up. You know, sometimes there's only, you know, it can be, you know, one model, and you're like, I'm going to teleport it to the other side of the board so that I can recap my home objective that doesn't have anyone on it. You know, so having a teleport is really good. Again, it costs a command point. That's probably the most annoying thing about it, and you really do want to be spending, as we've talked about, command points on Feeding Frenzy. But, you know, late game, you got no CP left. You roll your 4+. Now you have 2 CP in your turn, and you can teleport and you can Feeding Frenzy, and you're just living your best life. So, again, it's a very good tool in the toolbox.
I was just doing some maths, and I want to put into context just how important this might be. Like, when I look at the 2-inch movement, right, you're like, so what? You've got to remember, some of the scenarios that we play have an 18-inch difference between me and my opponent's line. So if I deploy, let's say, a unit of flayers on my deployment line, 15 inches up, and my opponent happens to put something on their 15-inch line, if they move 14 and there's 18 inches difference between us, that's a 4-inch charge.
Yeah.
Turn 1 charge, before you get your buffs on, I could be in combat. Yeah. If I then add chronomatic cogs, if there are other ways to increase that movement, or you know, I roll let's say I roll really hot on that 4-inch charge. Being flayers, they can fly over and get into some juicy centers. So you can do a lot with that, even though it's only 2.
Yeah, well, we're going to see we double dip in that in one of our lists coming up as well. We got it is really good, and it's like, I've played a lot of games where you're like, okay, I need to run my ghouls onto this objective, you know, and I'm like, my hero's not, you know, again, I'm thinking, you know, a lot about these sort of turn 3, turn 4, turn 5 late game situations where you're like, okay, I need a 6, you know, I need a 5 or 6 to make the run. You're like, okay, now you only need a 3 or 4. And you're like, okay, like, again, like, just, you know, you're like, oh, I need to screen. I need to get this hero in range to cast Feeding Frenzy. You know,
I don't need to spend the command point to get the 6, because an average 3 or 4 is enough.
Yeah, and you're making that most of the time, and it really just is. It's really nice. Again, it's sort of, you know, you don't get the charge buff that you do with cogs, but it also doesn't affect your opponent. So having +2 to move to your whole army is just really good.
Yeah, it is really good. And as I move into your first list, Warhammer Rob in the chat made a really good point, and I know you've said it, and I'll reinforce it. One of the things about Flesh Eater Courts is that they are quite command point hungry. You're probably going to want to re-roll charges. You want to be able to re-roll hits, let alone things like Feeding Frenzy and all the other good stuff you have access to. There are some really good command points. So getting them early and being able to generate them on a 4+, in addition to the throne, in addition to having battalions, you know, the more CP you could have, the better in this army.
Yeah, absolutely true. Absolutely true. Yeah.
Cool. So I'll read out the list. I'll read out the list, and then you can tell me all about it. So this is list number 1. This is the Royal Mordants list. What you've got in it is a blister skin list. You've got yourself a Ghoul King on Terrorgeist. You've got the artifact, the Eye of Hish, which is what we have to take. You've got the Law of Madness, the spell of Spectral Host. And then your mount trait for your Terrorgeist is the Gruesome Bite. You've got yourself a Vargulf Courtier. You've got yourself a Abhorrent Archregent with the artifact of the Dermal Robe and the Spectral Host. So you've doubled down on one particular spell. You've got yourself 40 Crypt Ghouls, 6 Flayers, 10 Crypt Ghouls, 6 Horrors, Royal Mordants. That comes in at a total of 2,000 points. You got yourself 1 extra command point from the battalion. And I'm just going to... What does Royal Mordants do again? I can't say I've used it.
It gives you 1 within, I think, wholly within 16 or 12 inches of your Vargulf Courtier, 1 unit from the battalion. So that's the Vargulf himself, the Ghouls, the Flayers, or the Horrors, gets a free move in the hero phase. So that's what I was sort of saying. And you're now your +2 to move is +4 to move because you're moving twice in the same turn.
So this is a 3-drop list, right? Because your Courtiers in the battalion, your Ghouls, your Flayers. Oh no, you've got it's 4-drop.
So it's 2 heroes, the 1 unit of Ghouls, and then because the 10 Ghouls are not in the battalion, and then the battalion. So it's 4 drops.
Because you're gonna take 1 Vargulf Courtier, 1 Horror, 1 Flayer, 1 Ghoul.
Yeah, so it's sort of a mismatch. So basically, we've got the Terrorgeist, good threat, does really good damage. Has this has the mount trait for re-rolling the bite, which is where you get a lot of your damage from. I've doubled down on Spectral Host. I know some people, when they play Royal Mordants, you can take what's the spell called? Deranged Transformation, which basically gives a unit additional move equal to their wounds. It doesn't work on high wound things, but you can basically make your Horrors or Flayers +4 to move, which when they're moving twice is +8 to their move. I've sort of found that's overkill, and I like having Spectral Host on the Terrorgeist, who often is who needs it, and on the Archregent, who, even though you can't cast it in the same turn, who can buff your sort of backline with it. And this is, when I was talking before, Lord of the Burning Skies allows you to teleport 1 unit that can fly anywhere on the board. And Spectral Host, it has 2 effects. 1, it lets you run and charge if you can fly, and if you can't fly, it gives you fly. So, once your Terrorgeist is, if it's later in the game, he's probably dead. Hopefully killed a lot of things, but probably dead because he's the threat. He's one of the biggest threats. You see
a Terrorgeist on the table, and people just go for it.
Yeah, exactly. This guy has the biggest target on his head, so and he's going to do some terrible damage to other people. So you've probably gotten a good trade out of him. But your Archregent can cast Spectral Host on himself, on these Ghouls, on your Horrors, and that gives them fly. And then you can use that Lord of the Burning Skies to teleport them because they are a unit with fly now. So the list, I think this is my favorite list to play in Flesh Eater Court's Royal Mordants, because that move makes you so fast. And there are a variety. You can put this in different Grand Courts. You can do, when I first played this list, I played it in Gristlegore, where I had Sword of Judgment on the Vargulf Courtier. And so that hero phase move, the Vargulf, people talk a lot about this Smash Bat build. And, you can take a different artifact. You can put an artifact on the Vargulf to make him hit harder. But basically what you do, the Vargulf gets to reroll hits if there's any successful spells cast near him in the hero phase. So you cast, plus D3 attacks on your Vargulf. You cast Spectral Host on your Vargulf. And so what he's going, I think he's a 12-inch move as well. So he's going 12 inches.
No, he's 10. He's 10 plus. He's 10 plus 2. Yeah.
I always have to remember. I'm like, have I already added the 2? But
no,
yeah,
I can't remember. I remember he's always like that, just a little bit slower than my Flayers, or it's just a little bit slower than the Terrorgeist. And as turn 2 and turn 3, that gap just becomes larger and larger. Yeah. It's base at 10.
So he's 10. So he's 12 with Blister Skin. So you put Spectral Host on him, and he's going 12 inches plus a run in the hero phase. Then he's going another 12 inches plus a run in the movement phase, and then he's charging. And that you can really use him as a seeker missile to kill a lot of things. Like, again, when he's piling, he's using that feeding frenzy on himself. He's piling and attacking twice. He's got these buffs on him. He can CP himself to feeding frenzy. So that's one use of Royal Mordants. But the thing I like about it is you can use it on any of these units. So you can use it on the Courtier, you can use it on the 40 Ghouls, you can use it on the 6 Flayers, you can use it on the 6 Horrors. And again, so your Crypt Ghouls are going from, okay, this is a unit that has a 6-inch move, to now Crypt Ghouls have an 8-inch move, and they're moving twice. So they're now a 16-inch move. With that you're sort of firing this block of horrors for. And again, if you're giving plus D3 attacks to a unit of 40 crypt ghouls, you're doing hundreds of attacks. And again, that's before all of these units, because of this battalion, all of these units become like a missile that you can throw at your opponent. And because the courtier and the flayers are flying, and you still have access to this teleport, it's sort of there's not a lot of safe situations for your opponent to be in. And like, again, you talk about this list, and I often am talking about the courtier flying, he's killing, a really important hero anywhere on the board. These crypt flayers are going a million miles to take out, like Mortek crawlers, tie them up, stuff like that. That's all on top of the fact that you do have this abhorrent Ghoul King on a Royal Terrorgeist who just, he slaps. He's going to kill stuff. He's like, your opponent cannot ignore this big guy while you've got these smaller threats just pinging around the board. And what I found when I played this, I played it in sort of the era when Gristlegore and Slanesh were in their heyday, and you were really killing these monsters with the Vargulf, is I would explain to my opponent what I did. I was like, okay, so he can run and charge, and he can run, so he can move in the hero phase and run and move. And they were like, okay. And they're like, okay, he can go pretty far. But what they don't realize is they're like, wait, how did he get me 48 inches away and kill? Because they've got, I think also they've got a screen, right? So they're like, this screen is here in front, but they don't realize that you stop in your hero phase 3 inches from the screen and then just completely clear it, and with your second move. And they're like, whoa, that is really far, And then maybe you've had to trade your Vargulf Courtier there, but what you trade, you're like, okay, so I've killed one really important monster, killed this support hero, done something with this teleport. Then they also will have to spend some resource to kill the Vargulf. Something has to then turn around and fight him, which is a unit that isn't scoring. It's sort of, he's like an endless spell, but he's still alive afterwards. And again, you can, I noticed a comment that says you could put this list in Hollowmorn as well. And same thing. You're then buffing up your horrors they don't have the fly that your flayers do, but they hit harder. So you and again, you're like, oh, crypt horrors are a little slower, and you're like, yeah, but that they benefit more from this double move. So like your crypt flayers, they're maybe fast enough to get something, get to where you need them to go anyways. You're like, I'm happy with my flayers because they're going 14 or 12 in Hollowmorn. And so they can get to, so now my horrors, which are normally their weaknesses that they do big damage, but they're slow. You're like, well, they've moved twice. So now they're hitting something really hard. And the thing you do have to remember is that it's you need to be within range of the Vargulf Courtier to move in the hero phase. So if you send your Vargulf Courtier off as your first missile, you're probably not sending a second missile. And sometimes that's still right to do, but you can do something like, again, if you're looking at this and you're like, oh, my crypt horrors, I think they're going to be the least useful in this particular game. You can ping them forward. You're like, they're my turn one threat. I throw them into, my opponent. Maybe it's a screening, something like, that your opponent doesn't want to lose, but had to screen with, into like 30 demonettes or a bunch of chain rasps. And you're like, okay, look, I've killed this unit with my really buffed up horrors with a turn one threat, and I haven't made a big sacrifice. I'm still backed up by my 40 crypt ghouls, my 6 flayers, my Terrorgeist that are my big threats. And it's like, well, you can't leave the horrors there where they hit you turn one, but it's not an efficient trade for your opponent to deal with them.
And then spoiler, your Ghoul King is going to summon something else as well.
Yeah.
And that was going to kind of bring me to a question that I know some people are probably wondering is, I can take a Ghoul King on a Terrorgeist, I can take a Ghoul King on a Zombie Dragon. And for someone who maybe doesn't have a lot of experience, when you look at the 2 War Scrolls, the Zombie Dragon has a better shooting attack. The Zombie Dragon summons a hero, like it brings on a courtier, as opposed to the Terrorgeist, which is, I don't think the shooting attack is nearly as good on the Terrorgeist, but in combat, the Terrorgeist does far more damage than the Zombie Dragon does. And the Terrorgeist summons a unit of knights, so you can bring on an extra unit of flayers or horrors. No, not horrors, flayers. Yeah, flayers or horrors.
Horrors, yeah.
So like, what's the rationale? Like, why?
Yeah.
Like, is there a situation that you'd bring in the zombie dragon? Like
So
obviously the Ghoul King on zombie dragon.
yeah,
That
yeah, yeah.
is.
The way I break it down when I've sort of crunched a reasonable amount of numbers on this is, um, the Terrorgeist does the most damage by himself, and that's why I bring him. If you're bringing two mounted kings, the most damage you can get is the zombie dragon and the Terrorgeist, because the zombie dragon has this aura spell of reroll wounds, which is really good for a lot of the things. In a list
Yes.
like this, you can still be casting that and giving all your ghouls reroll wounds, which is nutty for damage, or your flayers or stuff like that. It's not a bad choice. I pick it basically because in this list, as I said, where you're sort of firing units off here and there, I'm trying to maximize the sort of independent threat of the Terrorgeist. And then in terms of the summoning, both are really good. Like I think, again, if someone was like, oh, I'm totally new and I can only remember 3 rules, I'd probably just be like, just pretend your mounted kings can't summon, because most of the time, you're better off spending those command points on feeding frenzy, as we said, or not a triumph, but the generic command abilities for rerolls, or running 6 when you're going to charge, those things. So if you're new to Flesh Eater Courts, I don't think you have to worry about like, oh, the different summons on the Royal Terrorgeist Mounted King versus the Zombie Dragon. But also both can be good. Both can be good. If you do summon a Vargulf Courtier from your Zombie Dragon, he's got that independence, so he comes on from a board edge. He can re-roll his 9-inch charge on himself. He can Feeding Frenzy himself when he makes it in. The 3 Flayers can come on if you're summoning them from the Terrorgeist, and they can scream at a small screening unit. They can make a charge. They can provide a backline threat. They can steal an objective. So I think both are good, and it doesn't really sort of distinguish the two. I don't use what they summon to distinguish between them when I'm building.
But I think you've drawn out the point that I wanted out of you, and that is that the Terrorgeist, the Ghoul King on Terrorgeist, is more of an independent threat where it'll it doesn't have to babysit anybody. It does what it needs to do, and the rest of your army acts as it does.
Oh,
while
sorry, one more.
I was going to say, while the Ghoul King on Zombie Dragon is probably better as a support piece. If you have a Ghoul King on Zombie Dragon, you've got yourself a unit of 9 Flayers potentially. Then throwing down that that the Hunger spell. It's a generous spell. So it's only a casting value of 6.
Mm-hmm.
The threat range is 16 inches on a very large base.
Yep.
You can do some really, really tough things off the back of that. But
absolutely.
Sorry, and you had a point.
The only thing I'd sort of briefly forgotten is that also the Ghoul King on Terrorgeist has the Unholy Vitality spell, which gives you this 5-up after save. So that's also a really good spell for keeping him alive. Or you can slap it on your ghouls. You can slap it on anything. You can slap it on the missile you're about to shoot across the table. So if you are going to send your Vargulf Courtier on a suicide mission, you can give him. Yes, glad to hear it, Zardog. You can give your Vargulf Courtier this 5-up after save. It doesn't stack with the Deathless Courtier, so you've only got a 5-up instead of a 6-up, but it's twice as good. The 5-up is twice as good, and so you can slap that on your Vargulf Courtier before you send him away. And again, it just feeds into that strategy I was saying before of, you've taken out something with the Vargulf Courtier, and now your opponent's like, I don't want to get hit by this guy again. I don't want, because he's, the Vargulf Courtier is in your back line, sure, but he can be anywhere on the board in the next turn, because he's still going to move twice, as long as he's alive. And if you put a 5-up, maybe you've slapped Mystic Shield on him and a 5-up after save, and maybe you managed, because you can move infinite inches, to land on a piece of cover, you're in Gloomspite Gist, and you just land on their Loon Shrine and bite Scragrod to death, and you're just like, yeah, okay. And now they're like, oh, I don't want to have to turn around and deal with this guy, but I have to.
No, excuse me. Don't be bringing my Gits and Scrag right into this.
I've actually just been working on Scrag. The thing that's making me, I'm just thinking, I'd rather have this Vargulf come in and kill my heroes than that big Wind Fox just come in and smash my Loon Shrine to bits.
I think one other point that I might want to make before we move on is that whenever there's a Terrorgeist on the table, it's always enemy number 1. Yeah. And you could be running Flayers and Horrors and the Vargulf towards your opponent. but they will always ignore it because the number one threat, and if you ignore the Terrorgeist, even when it's damaged, fishing for those 6s for the Gaping Maw, it could do so much damage even when it's like almost dead. So you can't ignore it. But the good thing is then it allows you to do some real cool manipulation with the Courtier, your Flayers, and your Horrors.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they're not focusing on them.
I think you've hit it on the head. Like again, it's like a 2-part list. If you've got these little missiles that you're firing off that your opponent has to deal with, and it gives your opponent a headache because they can be anywhere on the board, and then it's backed up by just the powerhouse of probably the Feck book, which is this Terrorgeist, just mortal wounds, eating things, flying around, flying and charging, got a 5-up ward save, -1 to be shot, all this good stuff.
And it heals. I think people forget about that. It heals. Like when there's
every hero phase.
D3 it heals. So you've got 14 wounds, but if you get some lucky rolls and you're healing 3 a turn, and if you want to double down with like Emerald Life Swarm or something, or you find yourself a healing piece of terrain, that guy can hang around for a long time.
Yeah, and also like that D3 heal again is synergizing with having a 5-up ward save, right? That D3, those wounds are worth more because they're protected by this after save. And I think as a quick last comment, again, this is an easy list. People have already pointed out in chat. It's an easy list to change up how you see fit, right? There's a lot of spare points here. Reroll hits and wounds. Yeah, so for the zombie dragon, buffing up a 9 horrors, nutty. But yeah, exactly. This list, you've got spare points in these units. You can say, oh, I played it with 3 horrors instead, where I just use them to, kill screens, kill 5 life takers, and you can sort of expand or detract the sizes of these units. You can get an extra hero in. You can do whatever you want. There's a lot of wiggle room in the points of this, so you could get cogs in, like you said.
Yeah, I like it, and I do like. So obviously, it's easy for taste, guys. I really like that you've got the 2 versions of Spectral Host. It obviously doesn't mean that JP can cast it twice, but it just means that should that Terrorgeist go down really quickly, or be outside of its threat range, or it's being drawn into something, or it gets removed from the table. And you see this a lot, especially in death armies, where there's something like there's Fading Vigor, and there's certain spells in the death book that you want it on the table at all times. So taking a double, triple, just to guarantee that you've got the option and you can cast it in the best position.
Exactly.
Talk to me about, so we know for a fact that Royal Mordant is forcing you to take a unit of ghouls, flayers, and horrors. So I guess the couple of questions I have is, why did you take a block of 40 ghouls? Why not just go minimum? The other questions I'd probably have is, again, probably the same thing. Why did you go 6 and 6 as opposed to maybe going 9 flayers and 3 horrors, or the vice versa? And then what's the other 10 ghouls bringing to the table? I think that's probably like the mixture of how you've built it. I'm very curious.
So I think the easiest one is the last 10 ghouls is just for this list, I have to fill out battle line, and that's the cheapest way to do it. As we said, there's a million things to flavor it. And I played a bunch of these variations. One thing, the reason I've taken 40 ghouls rather than minimum is it gives me, I feel like, 1 extra threat. So, what I've found with playing, say, I played this list with 9 flayers and 3 horrors. And that's a bit nicer because the bigger block of flayers can be regenerated easier from the Vargulf. For people who don't know, Vargulf Courtier in your hero phase, you roll 6 dice and 5 ups regenerate a model, so you can bring back flayers, and the bigger your model, the less likely it's been totally wiped out, and you can get that regen, and that is good. The thing that I found
Courtier does both, doesn't it? It can bring back ghouls, and it can bring back
yeah. So that's what I'm saying. You can bring back any of these units you want from your Vargulf. So the bigger your unit, the more likely you are to get good value out of that. But what I found with the 9 flayers was it made me a bit more loath to throw that unit sort of away as a missile. It was just a bit more expensive, and because of the fact that flayers have a 1-inch reach and big bases, don't know exactly how big, but big enough that a 1-inch reach makes ranks hard.
50s? Are they on 50s or 60s?
Yeah, I think they're on 50 millimeter bases. That
they're quite large bases.
It's basically, I just found it hard to get 9 flayers worth of damage out of the 9 flayers if I was pinging them across the board. And it also, as I said, I've run it with 3 horrors, and I just like having this sort of, all three of these units, the 40 block of ghouls, the 6 block of flayers, and the 6 block of horrors, are all something that scales decently with buffs. You know, if I do give it plus D3 attacks, if I do give it a reroll or something like that, or a save, it's a decent unit to slap that buff on, and it is a threat. You know, so again, I wouldn't claim that this is the best Royal Mordants list you can bring. There are a bunch of different versions. I know Luke Ingram at the Victorian Grand Tournament played a Gristlegore version of this list, where instead of the big unit of ghouls, he had the unmounted Terrorgeist, which isn't in the battalion, but again, it's another threat. There are a million ways to build this, but what I like about this is that the big block of ghouls is a threat. When it can move twice, you know, I played this list against KO, and I killed an Ironclad with these 40 ghouls moving twice as far and completely surrounding the Ironclad so that everything inside it died when the boat exploded. And again, it's the sort of thing, you tell your opponent what you're going to do, but often until you've seen it, it can be hard to totally understand. The only thing is you had to roll a lot of dice for the crit.
But again, like when I look at the table and I've got a Ghoul King on Terrorgeist, I have Flayers, I have Horrors, I have the Varghulf that people are now paying more attention to.
Yeah.
And if you were lucky to get Cursed City, there's now a really cool sculpt for the Varghulf.
Yeah.
Like people, amazing. I hate my old Varghulf model. This new Varghulf type model, you're going to see so many of them on the table. You've just got a lot of threats. And I think one thing I like about the way you've done it as well is that when you've got a 9 and a 3, it's easy to see where the thread is going, and you know what you can anticipate. But when you have 6 and 6, it's hard to tell sometimes, and you know you might focus on one, but then the other one is just as strong, and that's the one that pips you. Mm-hmm. So, and obviously, as you said as well, you know, getting 9 in combat is quite tough. But one thing that sorry, is there anything else you want to talk about this particular part? I have a burning question.
Hit me.
I'm dying to ask it.
Hit me, Lord of the Burning Skies question.
Chalice.
Yeah.
Why on earth don't you have this endless spell? And it's an important question because I really like the Chalice. It synergizes with what you're trying to do really well. But right now we're in a meta where you have Croak. You have Teclis, you have so many, like Lord of Changes, you've got so many supercasters. Cities of Sigmar have gotten the Settlers Gang now, this supercasting wizard faction. There's a lot of magic supremacy right now, and Flesh Eater Courts isn't that good in casting. Like, you don't get a lot of pluses, you don't have a lot of supercasters, and like, is it because you don't have the points? Is it because it's harder to get off? Or the trade-off just wasn't worth it compared to something in the list?
It's a great question. I'm going to say a brief thing, which is not in my list at the moment, but the Corpse Cart is a unit you can ally in, gives all your wizards within 18 inches +1 to cast. It's really good. It really
At the moment, we have no idea.
Yes, that's true.
Grave Lords is, guys, don't go out and buy a
don't go buy it. All right, anyways.
Grave really Lords is coming, because you could always ally a Vampire Lord on foot, right? Because that would give you +1 attack. That used to be a good... Is that a good combo?
You can ally him in. I think it's only like Death Mages or whatever. I don't think I don't think Soulblight you could ally in. But yeah, so wait and see. This is me.
Grave Lords is literally coming. Grave Lords is coming.
Aside that said, what I found, so I used to run Chalice in my list when I played the original, like when this book first came out. And what I found was that it is a really amazing spell in some of the games. And in other games, you fail to cast it, or you never want to cast it because you need to cast these other spells. Can you still hear me? Yeah. Okay. So basically, it's just the changes for FEC came out, and we got basically a squeeze on our points. And for me, I was like, Chalice was just the nice to have that had to go. It won me games. I had games where I was like on 2 units of 10 ghouls just surrounding the Chalice, just desperately holding an objective because they were popping in and out of it. Really good spell when it works, and it's absolutely, I've had it heal a Terrorgeist completely back up to full from 1 wound or 2 wounds, and it is amazing. But when I'm looking at a list like this that comes in exactly 200, and I'd have to be dropping the unit of 10 ghouls, basically 10 ghouls out of this block of 40 for the chalice, which, as you say, sometimes I'm not going to be able to cast it because I want to cast a different spell. I don't want to have an overload of wizards here. I'm not going to be able to cast it because I want to cast a different spell. I'm not going to be able to cast it because Croak just unbinds it. I'm like, in my head, I'm like, these 10 ghouls could have been regenerated from the chalice, and we'll just say that that's how they got there. I think it's a great spell, and if you want to include it, you should. I just cut it because my experience was that it was a nice to have rather than a must have, rather than something I was glad I took every single game.
It's just hard to get off the table, I think. Even though it's a casting value of 6, right now there's just so much more magical supremacy, +1 to unbinds, auto unbinds. So
a lot of
paying
things can
for points.
Spell endless spells as well.
The last question I have before we move on to the next list, and this is a really good point, is Robert has asked, let's say hypothetically you have the option to go first or give away the first turn. Flesh Eater Courts don't have a good armor save traditionally. You're a bit of a glass cannon to a degree. And obviously each situation, each enemy, each battle plan is going to change, but are you likely to give away the first turn and go for a double? Are you likely to advance first and try to hit them in turn 1? What's your general thinking?
I'd say overall in Age of Sigmar, going second and taking leaving yourself not open to a double turn and giving yourself the option of a double turn is always a good play. It's I think if you do that with every single army you play where you get the decision, it's going to hold you in reasonable stead. And that applies to this as well. But I think this is a good army for taking the first turn in certain times, right? I think most of the times I played it, I ended up taking the first turn where, because my opponent had not correctly anticipated what I could do with one of these units with the Royal Mordant's move. That's what I would find. Like when I played versus Grissicor, when I played versus Slanesh, I just look at the board and I'd be like, my opponent has left a Keeper of Secrets behind what they call a screen, obviously delusional, for my Varghulf Courtier to just go kill turn 1. And I'm like, I think this is an army where, again, if your opponent is, they're KO and they've deployed entirely in a corner, or if your opponent has really understood your list and is in a complete impenetrable castle and is deployed defensively, just let them go first, and you can get a double turn if you won, or you can go second. You have got the movement range threat that you're not too concerned about going first or second. But I would say that this is a list where I'd say in general in AOS, going second is probably better as a rule, but I would make sure that before you make the decision, if you've got the decision, you're reasonably low drops, look for, is there a turn 1 opportunity to sort of cheese someone and just be like, oh yeah, I can actually just kill your hero that you really don't want to die. I can kill this threat. I can, throw all my buffs out. I can get, and another thing with Flesh Eater Courts, as you mentioned in the magic heavy meta, is sometimes you can notice on turn 1 that, Croak can always unbind, obviously, but you're like, oh, your Lord of Change is more than 30 inches away, and this might be the only turn that he is out of 30. So I'm going to take turn 1 so that I can get all my buffs on something, and I'm going to ping something in as a threat. So you can do that as well. So I'd say, yeah, if your default is go second, that's fine. But just before you make the decision, before you tell your opponent what you're going to do, just look at the board and be like, has he left himself open to one of these sort of turn 1 Royal Mordant threats? And you can also scare them, right? Because you just, after you finish deploying, you're just measuring stick just 48 inches long. Like, ooh, you're still in range, and they're like, oh no. So just have an eye open for going first.
I think one thing that I've learned being a destruction player, because I learned this when I was a Flesh Eater Courts player with my formerly the Royal Menagerie, now known as Grizzlegore. You've got to learn when not to overextend yourself, and while playing aggressive can be really powerful, because to the point of George Lee mentioning before that, it can be a bit flimsy. You can't take a punch. You can take a punch, but you don't have a really good armor save. You don't have, you're not Phoenix Guard. You're not OBR Mortek Guard with the Gothazar Harvester at the back. There's only so much you can take.
Yeah.
if you get your numbers wrong, or you overextend yourself and you think you try to charge and you fail the charge because you were, overly optimistic, and someone charges you, you lose some of your benefits.
You're in
If you
trouble.
get double turn between turn 1, turn 2, or turn 2 to turn 3, that's going to be trouble for you. So if you are going to build around it being aggressive, I think you've got to look for ways to increase that, whether it's going to be through chronomatic cogs, through additional spells, through things that are guarantee you almost a turn 1 charge.
Yeah. I think you've touched on a good point, actually, in general, for how to play Flesh Eater Courts. Is I often think, we touched about the Terrorgeist always being dead at the end of the game, is I think of it very much as a trading game when I play Flesh Eater Courts. I'm like, this Terrorgeist, as you say, he's got a 4-up armor save, and he's got a spell to improve his Deathless Courtier save effectively, that may or may not go off. So what I'm thinking, I'm not thinking about how do I keep my Terrorgeist alive, because that is just unrealistic. What I'm thinking about is, what's the most damage I can do with the Terrorgeist before he dies? And how do I play the game after that? So I think when I played Flesh Eater Courts, I played one event where I played 2 Nagashes back to back, and a little bit of trivia, I have never guessed Hand of Dust correctly. And so I lost, it was sort of one of those things where it was like turn 1, 1 dragon dead, turn 2, 2nd dragon dead in both games. But I was managing to wipe out a whole unit, in one game, taking the gaff down to 1 wound. So I wasn't like, oh no, I hope my dragon lives. I was just like, I'm counting him as already dead, and I traded him for this unit I've killed and this unit that my opponent has to commit in the next turn. So I think in general, as you say, you want to make sure you're getting those calculations right. When you're sending your courtier out to kill something, that's your battalion. You want to make sure that, 1, you can definitely charge and kill whatever you're going for, and 2, that it's a worthy trade, that giving up your Royal Mordant's move was worth killing whatever it is you killed.
And when I move to the extra list, I'm going to give JP a rest, but I'm also going to share you a bonus fact about me and what I like to do. The Terrorgeist is the last thing that I like to put on the table. I like to mess with my opponent because they are always wondering where I'm going to put my Terrorgeist. Is it going to be on the flanks? Is it going to be in the middle? I'll mess with them. So I'll have like 40 ghouls, but I'll bubble wrap to a point where I could actually have a big base in the middle. I'm never going to deploy it in the middle, but I'm trying to mess with them because what will happen is they're going to stretch their units a little bit further. They're going to try to put things in certain places they wouldn't normally do. And because Flesh Eater Courts has high movement, you can start to pull them apart because they're outside of their buff and synergy ranges, and you're really stretching them. So that's something that I like to do. I like to play the psychological game because the Terrorgeist has a reputation. Never put it down first because they're always wondering. And bonus points, when I played Legions of Nagash and I played Legion of Night, the Manfred build, I could put 3 things in reserve, and people were always worried about the Terrorgeist coming in from the side, and it never came in. Like they would screen the table, but it was never going to happen. But what will happen is the second list that you've given me. So this is the Blister Skin. Quick question: why did you give me a second blister skin? Because I asked you for 2 lists, and you could have given me a Hollowmorn, you could have given me, a Grizzlegore. Why did you choose a second blister skin as opposed to going a different route? Is it just the strongest part of the meta right now?
Well, originally I did give you a Grizzlegore list, and you flamed me for it. No, but
did I? No.
Yeah, no, just because it was the Luke Ingram's list we talked about before, and we wanted some more originality. I think the reason I picked 2 blister skin lists is I sort of see these as 2 of the more fun lists that people might not have necessarily seen before, or that they might want to see this variation of. And I think they're 2 of the coolest Flesh Eater Courts lists. I think there are great Gristlecore lists with 2 or 3 mounted kings. And I think they are a bit more of, does what it says on the tin. You're like, you have 2 or 3 dragons, you have your battle line, and you go and you just kill things. And you kill things really well in Gristlegore with mounted king. I think those are super cool lists. That's what I used to play in most of my events, and I think people should try it out. I think it's maybe less fun to look at and talk about, but I just think it's sort of a little bit of a coincidence that my favorite version of Royal Mordants is Blister Skin, and this list has to be Blister Skin. So that's why.
And one final thing I will say before we move on to the actual list is that, as one of the commenters mentioned earlier, is that your last list would fit perfectly in Hollowmorn.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
I think that's the cool thing, is like a lot of the time when you build a list in other armies, like it feels very much like it's built a certain way.
Mhm.
But with Flesh Eater Courts, it's minor
Yeah.
tweaks. So
Again,
um,
even that last list you can play in all four of the grand courts. It's got that block of 40 ghouls. You could take that up to 2 blocks of 40 ghouls and drop the supporting units to 3s, I think, and turn that into a Morgaunt list that's more about buffing up the ghouls. You can turn it into a Hollowmorn list. You can turn it into a Gristlegore list like Luke Ingram did and came second at a 60-person event. You can really, as you say, you can really turn, like, add the spice as you see fit and turn those lists into whatever it is you want to be playing.
So the second list we've got, so we've mentioned it's a ballistic skin list. Again, we're getting a +2 movement, all the good stuff that we just mentioned. But hey, go put this in another build if you want to put it in a different court. But what you're going to get yourself is you've got your Crypt Infernal Courtier. Internal, that's a bit odd. It's a general. It's going to have the command trait and the artifact that comes with Blister Skin. You've then got a second Crypt Infernal Courtier, and that has an additional artifact, the Flayer Pendant, which is re-rolling charge rolls for Flesh Eater Courts within 12 of the bearer. You've then got a third and a fourth Crypt Infernal Courtier. You've then got 9 flayers, 6 flayers. In one of my favorite battalions is Dead Watch. You've also got yourself an extra CP. So you're going to start with 2 CP, 2,000 points, 120 wounds. This is a bit more, I wouldn't say vanilla, but it's very clear cut what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Talk to me about this and talk to me about Dead Watch, because I haven't seen this for a while, but boy,
Yeah.
oh boy, does this have legs.
So Dead Watch is, again, often with Flesh Eater Courts, right, you put it in a battalion because it's giving you a CP and an artifact. But this also does let one of your units of Flayers fight in the hero phase, which is really good. It's with the build of this list, the idea fighting with your Flayers in the hero phase is, again, you're just essentially getting that 500 points of damage for free added to your list. And this list, shout out, I think it was Luke Morton who played a similar list like this against me.
Do I have to be named Luke to play Flesh Eater Courts competitively?
Yeah, I know, right?
Everyone you've shouted out is Luke, like Luke Ingram, Luke Morton. Like, it's a shout out to
it's
Luke.
Just because I don't remember anyone's first name, so I always assume it's like
shout out Luke. Shout out Luke.
Shout out to all the Lukes in chat. But yeah, basically the idea of this list is you've got these 3 blocks of Flayers, right? They're 4 wounds each. There's a lot of wounds in these. And you have got these 4 courtiers, and this goes into the muster we said before. Each of these courtiers is going to roll 6 dice, and for every 5+, you can bring back a Flayer into one of these units. So basically the way this list works is you're just setting out these big blocks of Flayers, getting into units, and fighting twice with Feeding Frenzy. You're taking a hit back, but because the units are so many wounds, you take 30 damage, right? And you've got 1.5 Flayers left in a block of 9, and then you're just rolling 4 sets of musters in your sort of, or 2, depending on what sort of battle plan you're playing, and you're regenerating that unit back, and then fighting in the hero phase, and then using your Flayer Screams from within the 3-inch range, which gives them +2 effectively to the damage that their shooting attacks do, and you're really just grinding people out with re-rolling your musters and keeping these Flayers alive. Again, I don't think this is like as competitive as the first list, because I think it's a little bit, no pun intended, or if you excuse the pun, like feast or famine, in that some armies are just going to have enough damage to kill 9 Flayers at once. Some destruction armies, some Hearthguard Berserkers, stuff like that. They will just be able to kill your 9 Flayers, and you're going to have to, in order to beat those, you're going to have to do some fancy corner tagging, weird shenanigans to try and win that game, and you're probably not going to be favored. But there are going to be games where your opponent can only kill 6 Flayers per turn, and you're bringing back 6 Flayers per turn to each unit, and you are just absolutely grinding. It's sort of to make up for what I was talking about in the last list, to show a bit of these different things of, Flesh Eater Quartz is fragile, but you can build this list where you really do leverage. Because I think one thing you look at in Flesh Eater Quartz is the points costs are quite high for the units, and often that is because they've got this cost for being able to regenerate them built in. And this is a list that's designed to sort of say, okay, well, I'm going to get my value for my sort of tax dollars that I've paid for that summoning cost. And again, you just get someone's in combat with these 9 flayers, and I said before, it can be hard to get all 9 into combat, but it's easier when, you sort of get a charge and you've got the 6 front row and 3 at the back. Then 3 die, you regenerate those 3, you put them back into combat in a place where they can immediately attack, and you're getting that mileage. And then they're attacking in the hero phase, and then they're attacking twice in the combat phase. You've got an extra CP, you've got a battalion CP, you've got a Hellish Orator, which is giving you, half a CP each turn. And so basically, that's the list, is you're just locking people into combat with these blocks of 9 flayers and grinding them out, because you're just regenerating 12, 20, 30 wounds per turn is just very, very strong. And you can play another version of this list, I think, with 27 flayers and dropping 2 of the courtiers, or rearranging the points and somehow. I like the 996 because I sort of like the really heavy going really heavy on the courtiers. So if you do have to split up into 2 parts of the map, you can send 2 courtiers to each half and stuff like that. But basically, it is just a list designed to abuse those muster rolls and to really get value out of the tax you're paying for regenerating units models.
Why? And I probably know the answer to this one, but why don't you have a courtier, like a Varghulf courtier, other than the points is obviously a little bit higher than the Varghulf? But why not drop 2 courtiers and have a Varghulf and an endless spell, or drop the command point and get yourself... Because one of the cool things that I love about the flayers is their scream attack, and I know that there's a lot of high bravery at the moment, and I'm wondering if one of the endless spells that gives you a debuff to your bravery could do some serious mortal wounds. So I guess the logic again, why would you go 2 courtiers? Why would you go 4 as to maybe 2 plus a Varghulf and an endless spell?
Well, one issue is I don't have any wizards.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say that.
You can. That's just me being trite. You can rearrange the list so that you get a Ghoul King in, and you can get an endless spell. And I think that's fine. I think you can drop some of the flayers and rearrange the list so that you do get a wizard, and you do get, even as we were talking about Chalice, to heal your flayers up, to get Barricade, to control the movement, to get, even Cogs, because you want to go really fast. You can do something like that, absolutely. I think, again, it's, for me, I was like, if I want to show people this list, this is like the most extreme version of the list. They're like, this is, if you want to see what this list does, this is it. If you play that list, that's the list with all the regen and all the flayers. Again, maybe you play it and you're like, I really do need an endless spell, or I really do need this buff. You can definitely rearrange the list, but I think that's sort of the distilled synthesis of what the list is just lots of muster rolls, lots of flayers.
Yeah, and I've been in situations where I've had to face the muster roll, and statistically on 6 dice on a 5 up, you should get 2. If luck goes your way, you get 3 or 4 back. It is so demoralizing fighting a bunch of flayers, getting them down to 1 or 2 from the 9, and then they just regen. And if you get double turned and then they go back to full strength, you just and my unit has got so much attrition, and I mean, between the screaming and the mortal wounds and the talons and then the additional attacks, fighting the hero phase, a smart general will know to take out the courtiers. And that can be challenging at times, depending on what army you're building. But it's so demoralizing, trying to fight through flayers, and their high speed as well means that, again, they can jump around screens, they can wrap into certain positions, and it really rewards you for getting a double turn as well. So I think, going back to one of the previous questions, give away first, let the player kind of move around, and then you can jump. And you'd be surprised how many of those 50-inch bases you can squeeze in a backline, especially that unit of 6. The unit of 9's a bit hard, but the 6 can, and even that might actually mean that you maybe you take a unit of 3 because that's even easier to squeeze in. So again, season to taste, do what you want to do, guys. But I really like seeing the Dead Watch back.
And a nice trick you can do as well is you can charge in your block of 9 and you leave one guy at the back outside of 3 inches, and you can lose a bunch of the front, and you're suddenly out of combat, and then you regenerate all your flares so that you're suddenly much closer to whatever it is now that you want to move and charge to. Like you can really be creative about how you can regenerate so that you're like, okay, I'm just out of 3 of this other unit, and then in the pile-in phase, when I pile in and attack in the hero phase, I can now tag that unit into combat. So there, it's a simple list, but it does have, there are nuances to how exactly you play it.
I mean, you're talking to a guy who runs 6 Gargants for 2,000 points. So,
yeah, exactly.
I'm the king of simple. But what I also really like about it, and why maybe Flesh Eater Courts players should revisit this type of build, is that in the current meta, which has got a lot of magic and a lot of shooting, these lists aren't very magic heavy. They're not relying on spell casting to get buffs. The other thing is that a lot of magic armies don't like to be hit. They can't take hit. They don't like to be hit, unless you're Seraphon and you got your stupid skinks. But most of the time, they don't like it, So if you can get your drops low enough, and yes, some pointy-eared jerk, elf player might have a whole bunch of archers going to fish for 6s, but if you can outdrop them and get in their face turn 1, you're going to ruin their day. And then little old Teclis at the back has got no friends, and you're gonna be eating on his innards. So getting the jump, and I think as a Gargant player, as an Ironjawz player, as a Beastclaw Raiders player, these people are really, and I was recently at a tournament, an 80-player tournament, and Destruction had a really good showing in the top 10. And I think part of that is the high movement, the running and charging, the threat range to get into these people and get them before they get turn 1, get their buffs, get their abilities, because we've got the jump on them. So
I think a good point, and I think that people don't talk about as much as they should in the shooting meta we're in, is that it's important to remember that combat armies in general do a lot more damage than shooting armies. Shooting armies feel like they do more damage because they do it all in one place. You're like, my Terrorgeist is behind a screen and he's dead. That feels like a lot more damage than when I was fighting Chain Rasps. But when you do get if you are playing against magic or shooting, those are armies that often don't have enough damage to kill 9 flayers in one turn, and they don't hit you in your turn, so they're like, okay, I took my first turn and I shot off 8 flayers from this unit because I don't want to shoot the courtiers who are in a bubble of -1 to hit from the artifact and -1 to hit from Look Out Sir. So okay, do I want to fish for 6s and try and kill this courtier? Maybe not. I'll shoot flayers. But if you're doing chip damage, if you're like Croak, you're doing D3 mortal wounds to all the units. If you're like Teclis doing D3 mortal wounds to all the units, and you are relying on doing that damage over time, sort of every other turn, because it's only in your battle round, you're going to really hate when those 6 flayers come back. And as you say, when those 6 flayers come back in your turn and hit you in your hero phase, and then hit you again twice in the combat phase, you're like, oh no. And you're like, I have this targeted damage, and it's just not enough to get me over the hill of killing a whole unit of 9 each turn, and they just keep coming back. And if you are forcing them to use those inefficient damage trades into your -2 to hit courtiers, then your units of 9 flayers are just fighting every turn at full strength anyways. And if it takes them 2-3 turns to kill all your courtiers, well, then you've had 3 turns of fighting with all 9 plus 24 flayers every turn, and also.
And the bonus to that is that once you've engaged them in combat, they must shoot at what's in combat, which is where something like the Smash Bat or the Vargulf, if you charge a Vargulf into, let's say, those archers or whatever it might be, and let's say you pin them, you get the Vargulf just on the edge of the unit, and you've only engaged in one of those Lumineth or whatever it is, it means all of a sudden your Vargulf is doing maximum damage with minimal return other than the shooting. While everything else is not being harassed. So you've made a sacrificial 100, 160 points, and and the rest of your forces advancing. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's just, again, it's what we were talking about before about these efficient trades. If you get your Vargulf into a big block of archers, right, a big shooting unit, you're like, okay, well, 1, I'm going to kill a bunch of them. 2, they're going to have to waste a turn of shooting on him. And 3, if he's got the 5-up ward save, he might not even die. And then your opponent's lost 2 turns of shooting, and that is sort of, again, for the 2 battle rounds of shooting, which is 4 turns of damage. And so, again, you're when you're playing Flesh Eater Courts, you really are trying to weigh up those things of like, can I get the value I need out of sending my Vargulf courtier to his death on the other side of the board? And often, and I think you don't want to play in a way of like, okay, I'm going to try and conserve all my units. I think that's a way of sort of losing slowly for Flesh Eater Courts. You've just got to be like, and I love it. It fits with the lore, right? You're just like, these guys are just gonna go fight until they die, and that's how they're gonna win. You're killing them, and I'm like, good. I'm glad. Like, that's what I wanted to happen, was for you to be fighting my Vargulf, and now he's dead. Now what are you dealing with this next unit? Now that you're stuck in combat with 9 flayers that are regenerating every turn, you can, as you say, you can no longer shoot off that 1 wound you still needed to do to a courtier.
Yeah, no, I dig it, and there's so many cool ways, and like depending on who you're playing, you could be looking at the ghoul patrol and getting ghouls coming in from the sides of the boards. You could be I remember playing an opponent who had a lot of summoning, and they summoned like 3 or 4 different units of knights, which worked out to be an extra 600-700 points on the table. So depending on your meta, again, I think we've demonstrated some different ways you can tap into this list. Add an endless spell or 2 if you want to go down that route. Add more ghouls, more flayers, more horrors. Drop some heroes. Add some more heroes. I think the lessons that we've kind of gone through here is just how you connect some of these rules into a competitive list and do quite well. You are going to have some hard matchups, just like everyone has. But I think we've really seen the low drops, their fast movement, and you win Age of Sigmar in movement. You don't win Age of Sigmar in combat. You don't win Age of Sigmar in combat. You win Age of Sigmar in movement. You score objectives early. You've got all the throwaway trade-offs. You've got the teleporting, the summoning. You've got a terrain piece, and you're not reliant on the terrain piece like certain armies are, where you can use it, but you don't need to hug it. What have you learnt by playing? I guess to bring us home. I'm conscious you've got things to do on your lovely Saturday, but talk to me about like, if I was starting for the first time, or I'm quite a new player and I haven't taken to a tournament, or I'm still kind of picking up the army. What have you learnt from your experience, other than obviously what you've dropped here today? But like, any lessons, any advice, any things that like looked really good but actually they're hot garbage, or things that you underestimated and went, holy crap. That Terrorgeist Scream, for example, is really good.
Terrorgeist Scream did win me 1 game, killing the exact number of ether wings I needed to kill. But I think the things that I've learned are really, I think a big thing is that trade-off thing that we talked about, but I don't want to harp too much on about that. I think when you're playing Flesh Eater Courts, it's very much like a team game for your army, where if it ties into what we were saying, but your Terrorgeist is not going to be able to win the whole game for you by himself, even though he does loads of damage. You need to have basically this battle plan and not get discouraged. Again, stay delusional that you're going to win the whole time, because you might feel like, oh, I've lost all my threats and all I've got are these ghouls, but you've probably done a lot of damage to your opponent in that time. And so you just don't let your head get down, because again, if you say, okay, I've lost all my big stuff, so I've just got 10 ghouls in my Archregent, which is a normal state of the game late. You're like, okay, I'm going to put plus D3 attacks on my ghouls. I'm going to give them reroll 1s. They get reroll 1s anyways from being near an abhorrent. You're like, I'm going to give them plus D3 attacks. I'm going to charge them in, and I'm going to roll it can be 100 attacks, and you need to be ready to leverage you need to be like, okay, I'm going to charge my abhorrent Archregent in, buff himself up into this other hero. He's a buff hero, but he heals 3 per turn, and he can fight. So I think you need to just remember to use all of the units you have on the board at all times. You can't rely on sort of the game being, oh, my Terrorgeist goes from unit to unit killing it, and at the end of the game, everything's still alive except my screens. I think your army is going to slowly get whittled down through the game. Your threats are going to die, and you just need to be ready to leverage all your buffs and your synergies on everything you have left. So I think also that's a good tip in general for if you're not playing a top tier army and you're gonna have matchups where your opponent's army is on paper, in the meta better, is just use all your units correctly, and you've got a good chance that you're just playing better than your opponent, and that's the way you win games. So I would say just don't write out your units of 10 ghouls, don't write out your archregents, your ghoul kings. We talked a lot about the courtier, but your infernal courtiers, a lot of these models are savage flesh eater courts models that can go win a fight against a similar hero from another faction. An Ideneth Deepkin 5-wound hero is not the same as an Abhorrent archregent who wants to be in a fight. He can pile in attack twice. He can buff himself. You can do this stuff. So just remember to basically move everything, have a plan for all your units, and just be totally ready for your stuff to start dying and for you to keep playing the game and win the game, with one ghoul left, and just being okay, cool, I did it.
Good question that came out of the chat. I'll bring that up in a second. That's a really good question from the chat. A couple of things that I've learned being a Flesh Eater Courts player is the Terrorgeist, even, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, but, a Terrorgeist that's almost dead still has 3 Fanged Maw attacks. They can still do 18 mortal wounds if you roll 3 6s. Every 6 is worth 6 mortal wounds. So you can't underestimate, because most people with a behemoth, you underestimate the behemoth and you can kind of almost ignore them once they're at half strength. Once they're at half strength, their potential just goes crashing down.
Absolutely.
But the Terrorgeist is a completely different story. They're still a maximum threat, and then once they die, they explode into even more mortal wounds. So any way that you can heal them, the longer you keep them on the table, they're just an absolute threat. For me, CP management and is key, and try not to use your CP on failed charge rolls. So knowing your threat ranges through it, knowing your statistically likelihoods of hitting yes, you want to hit the 9-inch charge, you've teleported, but the 9-inch charge has such a low success rate that burning a CP that could be better off used when you get into combat is absolutely critical, at least to me. And I think if you are running something like a Terrorgeist, take the fact that that they're going to target it and think about how you can use that screen to really maximize the rest, your flayers, your horrors, your ghouls.
Absolutely. That's a good point.
I think just know that there's going to be distraction kind of effects. Just people are going to go for it, but also play to its strength, right? Try to bait people away. Putting it on the flank, for example, where most people put their stuff in the center, is going to force them to go to one side, and that's where the rest of your army kind of snakes in or starts scoring objectives. And people always try to win via kill points, when actually you want to score, and that's where 40 ghouls are going to hold an objective. That's where 10 ghouls are going to hold an objective. So absolutely. Yes, R.I.P. the Aether Quartz brooch. I'm sure you would love to have that.
Yeah, of course. But also, I think a good point on what you're saying as well is that you don't, you can put your Terrorgeist on the flank, and that doesn't mean he has to stay there, right? Your army is fast, so you can say deploy him on the flank, and you just run him. You just run him as far as you can. You got +2 from Blister Skin. You run him right into the middle, and your opponent, your opponent is like, oh well, now I'm left sort of foot slogging across, and you're ready again to Spectral Host and ping that Terrorgeist in your turn, in your turn 2 to wherever you need. Oh my! Here we go. Yeah,
I'm not.
And Nathan Watson.
Nathan. Is he a friend of yours?
Yeah. No. So basically, the first event I won with Flesh Eater Courts, I took a corpse cart as we talked about, and I misread the base size when I ordered it, because I think it came with the actual square base, so you needed to order a separate base, and I basically just had the black coach size base for my corpse cart. And I think it was after game 2 or something, Nathan came up to me and was like, "Why are you doing this?" And I was like, "Why am I doing what?" So I had to play the rest of the event with a reduced range on the aura from my corpse cart, but. That's all. No one's ever mentioned that I won that event, but everybody mentions that I took illegal base sizes. I
can't believe I just talked for 2 hours almost with this cheater. But maybe a final question before we start wrapping it home. This is a really good one. Is so your second list
Yep.
came in at 2,000 points, but you had
Mm.
purchased
Yes, it did.
a command point. I've been running my Gargant list lately. I've just submitted a tournament list for something that's coming up in 2 weeks' time, and again I've gone 1950 as opposed to 2,000. For the reason that I'm really enjoying the Triumph. Being able to re-roll all hits or all wounds or all saves on one unit has
Yep.
been super powerful. Talk to me about what are your thoughts on Triumphs versus
Yeah.
an additional command points for Feck?
So what I would say is, if you're running a zombie dragon in your list, like a mounted zombie dragon, you probably want to be getting that Triumph. Ideally, a Triumph and an extra command point if you can, but you do want that Triumph. The thing about the Terrorgeist, almost all the damage that the Terrorgeist does is coming from those the bites and like the way those bites scale with buffs. So you already reroll hits from your mount rate on the bite, and so rerolling wounds is a good buff, but it's not that good. Rerolling hits not that important on the Terrorgeist, and so it's in those lists. I figured they weren't quite as important. In the Dead Watch list, rerolling hits on a unit of Flayer when they're piling in twice is really good. You know, again, in general with Feeding Frenzy, if you do have a Triumph, you're getting sort of double use out of it because you're piling in and attacking twice. So Triumphs are really good. And
That's assuming you get that. That assumes you get the Triumph that you want because it's a
yes,
random dice roll. So
yeah,
you might get reroll saves, which is rather useless for
yes,
Feck.
exactly. That's what I was going to say. It's like reroll saves. So reroll hits and wounds on your Flayers is pretty good. Again, you're getting double mileage out of it, but 1 in 3 times you're getting reroll saves, which was we talked about, is not the way the army plays. You know, when I've been playing Legion of Grief and I've got my block of ethereal units, you have reroll saves and you're loving it. You know, but if you're playing the block of Flayers with a 5-up save and a 6-up after save, right? You're re-rolling your saves. You know, it's better than not re-rolling them, but it's not really your game plan's not going to hinge on it in the same way. So, and also, you know, re-rolling wounds not as good. And we've talked about re-rolling hits on the Terrorgeist not as good. But if I was going a traditional Gristlegore list where you have one Terrorgeist and one zombie dragon, or 2 Terrorgeist or zombie dragon, something like that, I probably would try and get a Triumph in there, just because, as we've talked about, if you are playing a game where you need to make these efficient trades, having being able to give your zombie dragon rerolled hits is really good. And the scaling is crazy, because again, you know, if you're looking at a zombie dragon, you're like, okay, he's got all these attacks. You're like, now you're giving him plus D3 attacks. Now you're giving him reroll wounds from his own spell. If you've also hit the reroll hits on the Triumph, that's where your zombie dragon is doing stuff like deleting 1 block of 500 points and then on the second piling in killing Nagash. You know, that's the games where that happens. But as you say, if you've got the reroll wound spell on the zombie dragon and you've got a reroll wounds Triumph, it's not always the best. So I think Triumphs are really good for Feck. I just try a CP is always worth the second pile in. So if I have to choose between one of them, I'm probably going for the extra pile in, the extra command point, because it's sort of that guaranteed value rather than, you know, oh, whoops, I got, you know, reroll saves or I got reroll hits on my Terrorgeist, which I didn't really want, or something like that. But
Yeah,
if you end up
yeah.
with a Triumph, you know, you don't feel like you have to spend the points somewhere, because, you know, those rerolls are really good and they scale really well with your plus D3 attacks, with your double piling and stuff like that.
Is there any other thoughts that you would have? Like, obviously, if we had this conversation, say 6 or 12 months ago, I would probably really encourage endless spells. Things like, you know, whether it's Burning Head, whether it's going to be some of the new Forbidden Power, you know, Bravery debuffing type spells or Chronomatic Cogs. But the points investment, in addition to the difficulty to cast,
Yeah.
I think it's too much of a burden. I'd rather just have another courtier. I'd rather have another, you know, 3 or 6 flayers. I'd rather have, you know, boosted Terrorgeist to a Terrorgeist with a Ghoul King on top. Would you kind of agree that, you know,
Yeah.
it's just hard?
I think it is. I think the endless spells, you know, I've played the Barricade and the Chalice. I think both of them can be really powerful. But as you say, it can just be hard. Like, even in a game where you're not against Techless or Techless equivalent, you're sort of just like, okay, I hope I roll high enough and then my opponent just doesn't randomly unbind it. And you already have a bunch of good spells you're trying to cast. So endless spells, I think they're good. Again, like I've won games because of the Barricade. I've won games because of the Chalice. Like, they're not weak spells. It's just, does it fit nicely into your list? I wouldn't go like cutting things you don't want to cut out of your list to fit them in. But again, if you're sitting there and you're like, okay, I've got this spare amount of points, do I want a Chalice instead of a command point? Maybe if you're playing 100 ghouls in a Morgaunt list, yeah, you do. They are very strong game-winning spells. It's just sometimes they don't come off, and that's why I've cut them. But sometimes they're going to win you games, so it's not a bad thing to have in your list.
You've built more consistency in your list, is what I'm hearing, which came back to the trial conversation. It came back to just looking for more guarantees. And I think Flesh Eater Courts is an army that really needs guarantees because you're putting so much out there that too much risk and your army collapses. But JP, this has been awesome. I've learnt a lot. I'm rejuvenated. I'm curious to see how Soulblight Gravelords. I know you were talking about some allies like the Corpse Cart and I can't remember if the Necromancers Van Hales used to work with you, but we don't know what the Soulblight's going to bring. We don't know how that's going to change and what it's going to mean for allies. It doesn't. I mean, and if they are allies, what are some of the new vampires going to bring to the table? We just don't know at this point. But if people want to chat to you, your Twitter handle is below. Is there any shout outs you want to? Like, I know there's probably something you want to shout out, and I owe you a video. I swear, I owe you a video. If Games Workshop didn't just give me Broken Realms Techless and now literally Bellacore, I would be doing your video. Your video's coming, I swear. But is there anything you want to shout out?
Yeah, so I guess what we're talking about is we'll shout out listbot.co.uk. It's a website I run, does a bunch of statistical analysis. I used it not today, but when you were asking me to come up with Flesh Eater Courts lists, I went to it. I went to listbot.co.uk. I went to the page for looking at factions. I went to the Flesh Eater Courts faction page, and you can scroll there through, what sort of listbot thinks of the various units, through lists that have recently been played in Flesh Eater Courts that have done well at tournaments. You can go there and say, I want to show me only lists that have Crypt Horrors in them. Show me only lists that have cogs in them. It has a bunch of breakdowns, and I personally used it just to be like, okay, well, what are some cool lists? What are the cool lists in Flesh Eater Courts that I could see? And that's how I saw the Luke number 1, Luke Ingram's Gristlegore Royal Mordants list, which is super cool, and you can check it out on there. So I want to shout that out. I want to shout out I'll shout out Nathan Watson and the rest of the Northern Invasion guys for constantly bullying me about the corpse cards. And I'll shout out also Wargamer Online. That's where Luke number 2, Luke Morton, is from, who we've been doing some cool stuff with battle reports and talking with factions. And also, importantly, I want to shout out just the Flesh Eater Courts players in the Flesh Eater Courts WhatsApp group. It's a great group of people. There's a lot of the chats and sort of the social meta can differ, but Flesh Eater Courts is just always super positive. People are always like, okay, army's got this weakness, so I've been playing this list because of it. And it's just been super fun. And in particular, I also shout out Lee Bromley, who, talking about endless spells, he took a full loads of wizards endless spells feck list to Bobo, and we were talking about it, and I was like, do you think maybe you could drop the purple, what's it called?
Sun.
The big purple.
The sun.
Yeah, purple sun. Yeah. He was like, do you think you could drop that for the corpse card? And he was like, well, the only time that the purple sun has done any damage is when my opponent moved it onto my arch region and instantly killed them with 2d6 mortal wounds. And he was like, so maybe. But he wasn't convinced. And I was like, that's what I like to see. That's the passion that the Flesh Eater Courts community has to bring to you.
Oh, I'll also, at this point as well, if people want to talk more about Flesh Eater Courts, my Discord link is below as well. We got a whole channel dedicated to Flesh Eater Courts, so come talk list tech with us on Discord as well. It's a lot of fun. JP, this has been an absolute pleasure. Your Twitter handle is below if you want to list tech, you want to talk, but more importantly, go check out Listbot. The video is coming very soon, I swear. I was going to get through Broken Realms by the core and I can do it properly. But JP, I've learned a lot. I'm keen. This is great. And who knows what the future brings to you guys.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. It's super fun. Again, I love Flesh Eater Courts. It's been a while since I did a deep dive, and it's super cool to get into it. With another FEC player and talk about the ins and outs of this army. Again, we said there aren't that many units in the book, but you can see we've gone through down, then there are 12 million more rabbit holes, 12 other archetypal lists that you could go into, you know, before you even start to scratch the surface. So super cool. Thanks a lot for having me.
We could have deep dived into horrors. We could have deep dived into the Grizzle Gore build, like even like Ghoul Patrol, and do some crazy ghoul stuff. So there's a lot of cool list tech in Flesh Eater Courts. But we're going to wrap up. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for everyone hanging out live. And JP, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. It's been awesome.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you found that discussion valuable. If you did, give the video the old thumbs up. And if you have a comment or an insight, leave it in the comment section below. The champions over here are my AOS Coach Patreons and YouTube members. So you guys are bloody legends. Thank you for all the support. If you want to know more about the support programs, the links are below down here in the episode description, along with a link to the Discord server, so we can continue this conversation. Until next time, don't forget to name your characters and have a good one.